Awesome, then I will start streaming. And if you don't mind, I'll just do like a little introductory thing. That way everybody can kind of know what's going on. So, hi guys, welcome to Counterpoints. My name is Connor. Today we're going to be talking to Lonerbox. Basically, we had a debate, conversation panel, whatever, a few weeks ago. Maybe it's like a month or two ago now. It's been a decent chunk of time. But at the same time, one of the things that kind of came up was I think I called out the inconsistency in the philosophy of like, is diversity our strength? Like that's something that we hear repeated from liberal and progressive governments and social institutions and people who try to further liberal and progressive ideology. But then specifically in that conversation, if I remember correctly, it seemed like we were arguing that there were like certain like incompatible demographics, or maybe there were parts of like if I remember correctly, parts of the American right that were kind of a bunch of jerks, to put it lightly. So I kind of wanted to flip this on its head and ask, like, is diversity our strength? Is having multiple competing ideologies or ethnicities or languages a source of strength, or is it a source of weakness? And that's kind of the frame as far as I remember it. Did you have anything else for that?
Yeah, that's pretty much all it was. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So my contention, I literally just got done talking with a friend about this 5 minutes ago. My contention would be like, yeah, diversity can be a strength in some ways where you can learn a lot. Obviously, when there's conflict is oftentimes a jumping board for new synthesis and new ideas and new conceptions and new cultures and all that kind of stuff. But in order for there to be some level of stability, you have to have some level of shared value. So there has to be some kind of consensus on things that you can hold together, or else there's nothing really preventing you from killing each other. So what's kind of your perspective?
I've got a couple. I've got like kind of split thoughts on this. So I don't really like. I don't really like the phrase "diversity is our strength." It's always sounded weird to me. Although, like, if I wanted to go from like the research perspective, like I've been pretty well assured that like corporations or like just like any kind of thing where there's teamwork involved, like diversity basically is an advantage. And but I would tend to make the analogy that, like, say in nature, like a rainforest is good because it's diverse. But if you if you start introducing like toxic waste to the ecosystem, you're technically diversifying, but that's not really what's good for the rain. And then the same thing if you add like three fucking rapists to the anti-rape panel, you're diversifying again, but not really for like benefit. So I think when it comes to like demographics and immigration and all that, the argument is just really over whether or not you can describe whether or not any group falls under the toxic waste, like whether there is actually any kind of demographic that is weakening a society or something like
Yeah,
that.
and I think that's like a lot of the concern, and even right wing hypocrisy in a certain way. But I kind of want to try to articulate it as best I can. Because I am at cross paths or cross purposes with a decent chunk of the right when it comes to like immigration and cultural integration and assimilation and all that kind of stuff. And that's more because I've taken I call it civic nationalism, which basically means that if you prescribe to a certain set of like liberal principles, it doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, it doesn't matter what your original language is, as well as you're willing to integrate on these three, like I picked three. But as long as you're willing to integrate on these like three moral foundational principles, then I'm okay with you coming into the country, because I think from these three moral foundational principles, you can build a free society with a diversity of like religions and languages and peoples and all that kind of stuff. But my problem oftentimes when I'm talking to leftist liberals or progressives is that it's really hard for me to get that concession that people need to buy into a liberal society before they can be admitted into it. And oftentimes what happens is kind of like it's the paradox of tolerance, right? Where, in order to have a tolerant society, you have to be like kind of intolerant of the intolerant. Like I think that's the best way to describe it. And the frustration that I have is oftentimes when I bring up like, hey, there's this Pew Research poll that says XYZ about theocracy. Hey, there's this Pew Research poll that says XYZ about suicide bombing or whatever. Basically what happens instead is, instead of saying like, oh, hey, that's tough, we need to work on integration and assimilation to make sure that we have a peaceful, coexistent, productive society. What I get instead is, oh, well, intolerant and violent people already live in the United States, so what's the difference? And that's a really frustrating counterpoint for me.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Wait, what did you say your three main principles were? Was it language and what were the other two things?
Oh, I haven't articulated them, so it's not even language.
Okay.
Because I think language can be picked up over time. I would like America or the United States of America's language to be English, but that's neither here nor there. The three foundational principles that I think are necessary are actually espoused in the American Constitution, which is the right to conscience, which is
Mhm.
expressed best by the First Amendment, which is kind of like freedom of speech, the right to self-defense up to and including your own government, which I think is necessary in order to defend yourself against, kind of like we said, predatory people, but also the government itself. And then the last one I would say is belief in a limited government. Limited government is a loaded phrase because when it comes to libertarianism, oftentimes they just mean like a small government. When I mean limited government, what I mean is that whatever laws are passed constitutionally or legalistically, the government has to follow the rules that it itself sets. So, kind of like the rule of law, I guess, would be another way to express this concept. So,
Mm.
rule of law, freedom of conscience, and right to self defense, I think are like the three pillars of a free and liberal society.
Okay, and I think you were mentioning Pew Research because, like, I guess if you look at like that, like if you got a collect like the right collection of Pew Research stats on, say, immigrants from the Middle East, it might seem that people don't really respect those values, like especially freedom of conscience and things like that, right?
Well, I think some of these things can be malleable over time, but yeah, like if you look at, for instance, I understand Sharia in like a more nuanced way than I used to, but
Mm.
if you look at the polling for like, do you think that there should be any separation between church and state, or do you think that Sharia law or theocratic law should be instituted as a part of the state? Support in some countries is as high as like 99%, and I think like the lowest it gets is like
Mm.
80%. That's theocracy. That's something that we fundamentally decided as a society is not something that's important to us. Then also when it comes to suicide bombing, that's another thing that I cited. I want to say that the lowest percentage for people who thought that it was morally acceptable, some or like most of the time or something like that. I can pull up the Pew Research poll. Most of the time, for civilians to be attacked using suicide bombing in the defense of Islam, that's literally like how the question is phrased. It was like 3%, and it was in Pakistan. And this could get as
Mm.
high as like 70% if you're talking about the Palestinian territories. And that's concerning to me because let's say that we inverted this and we were like, hey, Americans, do you think machine gunning civilians is acceptable in order to defend Christianity? I think the answer would be like zero, or I would hope it would be zero. But that shows like a very real cultural difference that needs to change, basically.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So say with the Pew Research, I'll just take it all at face value. I can actually
I
kind
can
of
link it if
understand where.
you're. Yeah,
No, no, that's you don't need to.
okay.
Yeah, I can totally accept that that's those stats are probably true. I'm always really skeptical, or like maybe not skeptical, just like I always am a bit wary to kind of not exaggerate the meaning of like ideological opinion polls because people respond to these polls in like very, very strange ways. So like I know this as a half Lebanese person. Like if you ask people in my family who are like devout Catholics, like I've got like my dad and my uncles who like actually fought against radical Muslims in the Civil War. So, but if you ask them a question like something really like, did America deserve 9/11, right? Something crazy like that. Some of them would probably say yes. Like if they were polled in that, they would just go, yeah. But you ask them to elaborate and it's like, well, actually what they mean is American foreign policy. They supported the Mujahideen and they supported like bin Laden and this is the kind of thing. And you destabilize the Middle East. This is the kind of the kind of blowback you should expect. If you maybe asked a follow up, like, did the people who died deserve it, they would emphatically no, right? So it's like, yeah, I think people express themselves really in really strange ways when they're asked these kind of questions. If you wanted to get another example, like I don't know if you know about that poll from kind of 2010, 11 from Germany during the kind of like Merkel multiculturalism has failed era. Um, especially if this happens after like a really publicized event, like say if like a gang of immigrants like attack a local German woman and then it all goes smashed across the press and then there's a poll like the week after, you start to get all these like really insane responses. Like what there was a poll that found like 13% of Germans would welcome a new Führer, and like more than a third thinks Germany is overrun by foreigners, like using invasion language, and then 17% think the Jews have too much influence. But you go to Germany, and you walk around, you're not going to be surrounded by like 13% of the people are like fucking Nazis who want to gas you. You know, like you'll see Germans just like walking. And the people who answered those questions probably have like loads of like Turkish friends, and they go to kebab shops and like, you know, some of them might even be like, it's so people like, yeah, people express their opinions in really strange ways. Like they use protest votes when they answer these kind of polls. And just the last thing, when you mentioned like Sharia law, Sharia law means like massively different things to different people. It doesn't actually mean theocracy at all, really. It can do, but for some Muslims, like Sharia law is just like their lifestyle, like what they want for themselves, and like independent of other people. And like say in Egypt, like popularity for Sharia law during the Arab Spring was like one of the biggest things they emphasized was like it was about interest-free loans for small businesses. Like it wasn't anything to do with like enforcing Islamic rules. So yeah, I'm a bit I'm always a bit wary of like exaggerating the meaning of like polls like that.
Sure, and this is kind of like where I think like 5 years ago I would have been like a lot more alarmist, where I would have been like, oh, this thing means this very specific thing, and we have to do ABC about it or whatever. And nowadays, I'm kind of more of the idea that it's like, all right, so we're not committing ethnic or religious genocide, right? Like that's off the table for a host of moral reasons. And so what does that leave as far as alternatives? And as far as alternatives, it means that we have to diplomatically interconnect. We have to understand each other. We have to build like bridges of cultural communication, and we have to understand like so for instance, like you know, one of the things that we're talking about is like, you know, more of how do these things actually get interpreted for the individual. Well, even somebody who had like a super hyperbolic, like, yeah, fuck it, I don't care, suicide bomb in the name of Islam, who gives a shit, like even that hyperbolic person, if you sat down with them and you talked to them for a few hours, especially as like a foreigner or whatever, probably one-on-one you could come to a better result as far as like cultural communication than if we had just remained as like distant non-communicative peoples. And so part of the danger, but also the opportunity of increasing like globalization and internationalization, is that we have these cultural communicative opportunities. What I would use as past examples of where we were able to seize the opportunity for issues like this would actually be Japan and Germany. Because we went to war with Japan and Germany, they held at that time moral systems that were completely antithetical to anything that a liberal democratic country would want. You know, Nazi Germany was obviously like an authoritarian fascist state that emphasized like, you know, racial purity and, you know, genocided a decent chunk of people. And then Imperial Japan, while maybe not like ethnically genocided people, they still did mass slaughters in an attempt to assert their like imperial hegemony over Asia. Now these people are amongst our strongest allies and probably have a whole bunch of cultural norms that we actually appreciate and love. And, you know, we got anime and, you know, German bondage porn and all sorts of shit. So like, you know, like we've yeah. So we've figured out a way to culturally communicate and find the value in each other. And I think that's important. And so what I would say for the, you know, I don't even necessarily know all of the opportunities that the Arab or Muslim world offer, but there has to be some, right? Like whether we're talking about like food, culture, cuisine, anything like that. You know, there's going to be some things that are beneficial. Emphasis on family, emphasis on you know, on get-togethers, emphasis on that. There's a whole bunch of things that the Middle Eastern and North African region could probably offer us culturally if we were willing to communicate. And then this is where, for the right wingers who in my audience are probably expecting like a more reflexive or like defensive perspective when it comes to like globalization or internationalization of the world. Here's the thing. This is happening whether we like it or not. the
Mhm.
reactionary right wing political groups that are fighting it, chances are not going to win. As a result, globalization and internationalization is likely going to occur. So the question is, how do we deal with this with the least amount of bloodshed possible? And that's where it sucks being a centrist or whatever the fuck you want to call me, because the problem is my first reaction to if somebody says that they support like Islamic theocracy is like, fuck it, you don't get to come to the United States. Like that's my initial reaction. Same thing with you support suicide bombing. Oh, you sometimes support suicide bombing against civilians? Well, guess what? You're not fucking coming.
Yeah.
And I still kind of I still hold that perspective. But I think that in order to get people to no longer believe that, we need to address why do they believe that, which could have some geopolitical factors in it. And then how do we change that? And I think that's an important question. And I'm just gonna fuck with my lighting, but I'm listening.
Yeah, I'm wondering like the kind of it would be a really kind of oxymoronic if someone supports Islamic theocracy and then decides to come to the UK. Like that would be a really self-defeating move. I mean, uh
But what if
like
you had like a more nefarious game plan? Just out of curiosity. So like if you
hmm,
thought that through mass immigration you could create cultural enclaves, you could over time influence the society that you were becoming a part of because you saw it as like decadent or weak or whatever. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying
hmm.
that doesn't mean that there aren't people who think like that.
Yeah, I'd still say like, like any attempt to be doing that so far is like a catastrophic failure. Like these if even people who get radicalized, like Muslims who get radicalized in Europe, like they are like the most religiously apathetic motherfuckers you'll ever see. Like they don't like people complain about this all the time. People get radicalized and then they go and join these groups and then they get to like Syria and they find out like half of the ISIS guys don't even know how to pray, and they don't know anything about the Quran. They only know the cherry picked bits about infidels and like bloodshed and shit, like the same bits that like Tommy Robinson reads. Like they have a lot in common. So it's like yeah I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering, like, I guess maybe there's kind of two questions I wanted to pick out of what you were saying. One was like how you would intend to like I guess maybe like a kind of baseline ideological screening test, like how you'd want to enact that for whether it's migrants or refugees. And then the second one would be like, is there anything that you see at the moment in like Europe and America that is indicating that cultural clash between like Middle East and West?
Yeah, so to answer the first question, how would I attempt to join these worlds, basically, and how do we screen? I think it's as simple as asking. So for instance, like, hey, do you support religious theocracy? Do you support suicide bombing as a tactic in warfare? This, that, the other. Chances are, people who are trying to come in are going to say no, right? Because they know that it's going to
Hmm.
reflect upon them poorly as they're coming in. But what I would say, but hopefully that kind of like it starts the juices flowing. And on top of that, I think these are perfectly legitimate questions for a secular liberal country to ask. Is like, hey, are you okay living under a secular liberal society, or do you want a theocracy? Because we're not about that shit. And then the same thing with the suicide bombing. Well, the reason why suicide bombing is so interesting as like a moral framework for judging somebody's perspective on violence is because not only is it slaughtering civilians, which is already viewed as like a terror or horror in war, it's also sacrificing one of your people in order to do it, which is why I think it's like it's particularly horrifying to the Western individualist mind. So I think
Hmm.
asking those questions is important. But let's say that we have somebody who's just going to lie, right? They love suicide bombing, they love theocracy, they think it's based, but they're just going to say it in order to get into the country. Well, what I would
Hmm.
say is after that, part of the integrated process, which I don't think we've necessarily been that good at, maybe we're a little bit better about it in the United States than some European countries. Part of the integrated process, one, I think Denmark did this recently, where they basically said, like, hey, we're not going to have ethnic enclaves. We are going to integrate people into our already existing society. So we're only going to have a certain percentage of people in each area. I think that's perfectly acceptable for a host nation to do. Two, I think that there should be like an educational time, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, who cares? but basically educating people who might not be familiar with the country. Yeah, they know American Pie and rock and roll and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all the crap that we're famous for, but maybe they don't know the civic principles of the country. And basically educating people as they come in on like, hey, this is how we run things. This is why we think the way that we think. This is why we do what we do. And then maybe you can start bringing people along. Sorry, I have to grab a dog. And then I want to answer your second question, which is like, I would think that jihadist terrorist attacks would be indications of failure in this integrated process. And I'm very happy that jihadist terrorist attacks have dropped off in the Western world over the past half decade. But I would say 2016, 2017 in particular were very scary times for this problem.
Okay. Yeah. Fuck. I wish I'd like. I've just been reading like about this like kind of recently. I wonder. I wonder if those two positions might be like slightly contradictory because I'm maybe there is a good way to do that whole like I don't know secular liberal education and everything. But I know what happens like in the UK. They have all these kind of like tests and like reward systems for citizenship and things like that that are just like so like condescending and like very arbitrary and just things like you know like if you want to be a British citizen as a migrant you have to like swear loyalty to the Queen. Like they're just kind of like really strange shit that most people who were born here probably wouldn't want to do. And I wonder if like part of that process that like I can't remember what the word for it was, just like a kind of like semi-forced integration is kind of part of what alienates immigrants. Is like they're kind of like you're treated as an outside, like a proper outsider that needs to be kind of like melted in here from the get-go rather than just treating them normally. As for yeah, I don't really know. I'm just gonna think. I'm trying to think about an example of that that actually works. I don't know if the Danish thing. I don't know if how successful that's been, or I don't even know the context of it really. But
Okay, but
is there an example of these kind of things working that you know of?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sweden and Denmark are probably the places that are catching flack for doing it currently. But I also don't think that I've seen any jihadist terrorist attacks. I know that there's some concerns about like crime in general and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think there's been specifically any mass jihadist slaughters of public folk. So I would say that might not be an indication of anything. We got to give it time. That I mean, this is all happening within the past 5 years. But what I would say is that I don't care. Like seriously, let me address the three of the things that you said very specifically. So arbitrary cultural impositions. I don't think that like when Afghans or Iranians are seeking asylum into the UK, they should be forced to drink like breakfast blend tea, over chai. You know what I'm saying? Like that's very arbitrary. Also, but like I said, I highlighted like 3 foundational moral principles that I think are necessary for a free society, which is basically right to conscience, right to self-defense, and limited government. I understand that's not the same as the UK, but these are three things that I think are incredibly important for free societies. And I think you ignore, like the UK in particular, ignores these values at their own peril. When it comes to one of the things that you said, and I'm not trying to be, a jerk about it or anything, but you said like integration is an imposition, and sometimes it can feel condescending. Well, guess what? If you're fleeing a war zone where literally your neighbors are getting executed right next to you, if you're fleeing a country because you're gay or you're a part of a minority ethnic group and you're on the verge of slaughter, sit through the PowerPoint and shut the fuck up. Because basically you're talking about like death on one hand, being bored by a PowerPoint on the other. If a bunch of boomer English people or boomer Scandinavians or boomer Swedes or boomer Americans are explaining to you about what they think being an American is all about, and you disagree with it, or you think like, oh, I'll take that part, but I'm not going to take that part. Either way, it's better than getting shot and killed, which is allegedly the reason why you're fleeing to these other countries. Or if you're an economic migrant, it's better than having almost no economic opportunities. So just like I had to sit through 13 years of education that I thought was bullshit, anybody coming to this country, anybody coming to any other country that they weren't born in, if that state mandates like an 8-week, 10-week, 12-week course on how they run their culture and their civic institutions and how they expect these people to integrate, you need to compare the things that are being imposed on your life and shut the fuck up and listen to the PowerPoint. So
Okay. Fuck. I wish I knew more about this Danish thing because I'm just like skimming a few. I all I can see is like
well,
headlines talking
can
about.
I, yeah,
Fuck.
can I tell you some of the criticisms of it?
Yeah, go on.
So the main criticisms of it is that it's breaking up people who are coming from the same scenario. So
Uh,
people who are in a refugee status, people who are coming from Syria, people who are coming from Iraq, people who are coming from failed states in the Middle East and North Africa, they're basically being broken up and they're being kept in a certain like ethnic percentage per neighborhood. And
yeah.
the reason why this is being criticized is because it seems draconian to be telling people like, oh, you're coming to our country. Oh, guess what? You only get to live in these neighborhoods and you can't move. Like that seems kind of draconian. But the integrative intent, which I think any state has the right to assert, is that they don't want to create ethnic enclaves or ghettos. So by trying to minimize the amount of people who are going to be in a certain area, they're basically guaranteeing that that's what's going to happen is that these folks are going to deal with Danes on a daily basis. They're going to have to learn the language. They're going to have to interact with the people. They're going to have to participate in the local businesses. They're going to have to participate in the social and civic institutions, therefore almost guaranteeing their integration because they don't have ethnic enclaves on which to rely. Now, I'm sure that the criticism of this is basically like ethnic enclaves can be an important time or they can be an important place of social support during an extremely stressful situation, which let's face it, like refugee status, being asylee is probably very stressful. But what I would say
Mm.
is, again, pick your poison. Do you want to be back in the country that's fallen apart, at which you're like at risk of getting killed? Or do you want to be learning a new language and participating in a new economy that has been, by the way, this is my frustration, that has been gracious enough to accept you in your time of need? This is one of the things that's really frustrating for me when I'm talking about this issue is I don't feel like there's any expectation on the part of the people who are escaping dire circumstances to integrate, to force themselves to be a part of the society, to learn a new language, to become a part of the social fabric that already exists. And that's incredibly frustrating because while I could agree that there's a moral duty of these countries to, if there's somebody in need, you should help them, there's also a reciprocal duty on the person who's being helped. So I'll leave it there.
Yes, so that's kind of what I wonder about cultural differences, though, because I mean I don't know if I mean it's probably worse in America, but like I'm sure in plenty of parts of America you can go into like don't you have like literally self-segregated like Christian parts of America where people will actually just like they'll have like a Christian yellow pages and they'll have like a Christian school and like Christian chemists and all that and like just like these very tight-knit communities who are probably very like ideologically backwards, probably don't really support like the pillars of American society at all. Like if that's the standard rather than um, immigration, would you want to have like the same thing for them as well?
Okay, but let's parse about this, and I'm actually really happy that we're doing this one on one because I feel like somebody else would have jumped in and started screaming at me already. Basically, number one, do you think that's a good thing that natives, I guess if you want to call them that,
Mm.
Native American Christians are segregating themselves based off of like religious background and are only dealing with people who share their faith and their perspectives 100%? Is that good or is that bad?
Um, I think that's pretty bad. Yeah.
Okay. So then this is where I would get to it. Because I want to be 100% clear with this. American citizens, unfortunately, because they've already by their birth have signed on to this like secular liberal project or whatever, I can't do shit about them. Okay? I can't. I wish I could. I wish I could bend their arms behind their back and say, no, you're going to talk to different people. You're going to interact outside of your community. You're going to learn more about the United States. You're going to learn more about its civic institutions. But I can't because they were born here and I don't have that power. However,
Mhm.
what I would say is beggars can't be choosers. People who are in an asylee status, people who are refugees, we shouldn't say, oh, there's people who are in the United States of America who are already engaging in bad behavior. So why do we care if you engage in bad behavior as well? Fuck that. And
Yeah. So
like, I
that's
don't, that's the logic that's failing me
So
right now.
that's kind of where I would maybe swing back a little bit is because
Mhm.
again, like I don't really care what the polls say on say like European Muslims and gay people. Like I'll guarantee like most of them think it's a sin, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
But they vote left wing. They vote for the parties that push gay rights. And you compare that to like I don't know, like fucking J.K. Rowling, who probably says she's like pro-trans as fuck, and then has fought to legislate against them for her entire career. So I think there's like a kind of misbalance there. But this thing in Denmark, yeah, it's like it's trying to put like a maximum of 30% in a community can be non-Western. I think that's kind of troubling, and it's kind of ignoring the fact that
Why
this kind of
30%
self-segregation, like
sounds 30% sounds high to me. Like, are you
I
are you saying that we shouldn't have a limit at all?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, that's incredibly frustrating to me. Especially like okay, so I used to work as a law enforcement officer.
Hmm.
There are ethnic enclaves inside the United States. I think these cultural divides can be gapped, especially by people who know both languages. But there are people in the United States who live in Spanish only enclaves who only speak Spanish, despite being here for 20 or 30 years. That's a problem. If they don't
Okay.
interact with the remainder of society, that's a problem. There's also, hold on really quickly, there's also
yeah.
cultural tropes that don't communicate to the broader society. So, for instance, like animal abuse is very common. Chicken fights, dog fights, these are just culturally accepted normative parts of these subsections of society where animals are being caged in terrible conditions, they're being injected with drugs, they're being forced to fight each other, and this is just completely culturally acceptable. Literally, like literally found a dog that had been mauled to death by two other dogs who were being trained to fight. This is just socially acceptable. So what I'm saying is, number one, that's not socially acceptable. Fuck that. Number two, the natives, the people who have certain moral impositions on society, have the right to reserve those moral impositions, especially if they're saving somebody from a society that's falling apart. And on top of that, some of these things, some of these cultural mores, like support for suicide bombing and support for theocracy, I would argue, are some of the reasons why these countries suck in the first place. So that's like very concerning to me that it doesn't matter to you.
Well, it's again,
As,
it's kind of like
as long as they
so
both
you've got
die.
like well, yeah, because exactly like in practice, they don't behave in that way. And again, it's like it's opinion polls. Like the way that they express it is clearly different. Like they're not devoting their energy against against liberal society. Like they're actually upholding those values better than quite a lot of like white locals. So I think if the thing about civic nationalism or the like the standards you're setting are for like values, I would judge it on values rather than like the circumstances or the ethnic backgrounds of the people coming in. Like, okay, if people are fucking like chicken fighting and doing illegal things and doing things that are actually like not accepted within that society, they shouldn't be allowed to do it, right? Like, I'm completely, yeah, like they should be treated equally under the law, which is why I think this thing about like putting ethnicity caps on ghettos and like subjecting people to like a kind of like special education that I think in most cases they demonstrably don't need it. Like there were like millions and millions of like there was like 1 million refugees that went to Germany, and like what like less than 1% of them, or like a tiny fraction of them committed any crimes at all. I think in America you could count it on like a piece of paper for over the last 5-10 years. So yeah, I think wouldn't it be like isn't it part of like the liberal democracy is just like people live here whether by uh genetic lottery or because they arrived as a refugee, is like you don't assume guilt before they've done anything. You treat them accordingly if they break the law and if they don't.
No, and the reason why I don't agree with this is because I don't think that I don't think liberal democracy or secular democracy is genetic. I don't think that it just perpetuates itself without cultural reinforcement. I don't think social mores perpetuate themselves without some kind of cultural reinforcement. And this is, part of the reason why last night I attacked the right wing over not valuing involving ourselves in education is because you literally have 15 years to educate the populace on civic virtue and civic morals and laws and standards and cultural expectations and all that kind of stuff, and we've just completely let it be a liberal progressive affair. We haven't demanded anything of our educational institutions when it comes to like civic or moral education. And no, and if anything, like, I wouldn't say that this is like the fucking free for all that we're talking about, where we just say like, oh, you live here, well, fuck it, you can do whatever you want as long as it's not technically illegal. These things require enforcement. If you want people to not dogfight, to not chicken fight, if you don't want them to commit suicide bombing, if you want them to value individualism over collectivism, if you want them to value other people who are outside of their stereotypical ethnic or religious enclave, these are things that are educated. These are not things that are inherent. And like, I really don't understand the assumption that like, oh, well, these people didn't commit a certain amount of crime, so therefore they're already educated in this way. Hell no. Cultures are massively different. Not everybody believes in liberal democracy. Not everybody believes in individual rights or anything like that. And on top of that, like, the exceptions that you're talking about, while they might be statistically exceptions, some of them are horrifying. So, for instance, like female genital mutilation in Michigan, there was a doctor who was performing these surgeries on behest of families who thought it was okay and thought it was good that they scraped off the clitoris of their young daughters. I understand that might be statistically negligible, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that you don't tell people, you don't fucking do this shit here, or else you're going to jail while they're on the way in. Mm-hmm. And then same thing with individualism, suicide bombing, terrorism, ethnic like collectivism. These are all things that are simply not acceptable. So why can't we tell people that they're not? As a matter of fact, let me rephrase this. That way I'm not just fucking moral soapboxing. Why can't we tell? Okay, people are in dire straits. They need a new place to stay. We are inviting them into our home, and we have expectations about how they conduct themselves. Why is it a moral imposition or some kind of egregious imposition to say, hey, guys, these are the house rules. If you disobey these, we're going to fuck you up?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you say that bare minimum, I think there are probably checks to make sure, like, not just that they don't have any terrorist background, but that they have like even like terrorist sympathies are checked for like pretty hard in the asylum process. I think, do we not agree then that it's, if anything, they go too far like the other way? They'll ask questions like, what's your favorite holiday, as if like the fact that you say Ramadan instead of Christmas should weaken your asylum claim, right? So I think, do we not agree on that it's like that it is the bare minimum of like criminality and like sympathies with terrorism? Because we already select for that.
There's a gentleman named Nate Dillon who I talked to on the podcast, and he's an immigration lawyer. Basically, what I asked him, I literally asked him this last week. Do some of these states even have the ability to check the records that are being forwarded by people who are seeking asylum? And this wasn't in reference to Middle East and North Africa. This was in reference to Central America. And he said no. So people are bringing like original documents. So they're bringing their birth certificate and all that kind of stuff. But if you live in BFE, like random part of Nicaragua or Guatemala or something like that, the chances of them getting like a coherent Social Security standardized police report about your criminal history in the host country is like not great. And so basically, you're relying on the asylee interviews a lot when you're making the decisions about who to allow in the country and how valid their stories are. Now, that's not a problem because, like, so for instance, I don't want to like overemphasize my alarm. I don't think I'm half as alarmed as many people on the right. What I am trying to say, though, which I think is the reasonable request of the right, is that we should set very basic social and civic understandings for people who are coming in. And if they're not willing to verbally say that, yes, we understand and will abide by these civic and social virtues, you don't need to fucking come here. You can go someplace else.
Okay. So. Yeah, I mean, it like, yeah, of course you're like not as alarmed as like anyone else on the right, by the sounds of it. That's why I just wonder, because when I think of the issue, especially in Europe, I just think the issue is it's not a bare minimum. They are asking like massively arbitrary things, or they keep on fucking around with like uh, there are like half of the countries in the EU describe Libya as a safe port of entry. It's been in civil war for 10 years, right?
Mhm.
And they're saying that no, you're actually not a legitimate refugee if you came from Libya because we've got some friends in the Libyan Coast Guard and shit. So like yeah, that's why I think my argument really when it comes to that is we are being too strict now because we're not looking for a bare minimum. We're looking for these like perfect refugees who are like just the right level of desperate and emotional, but also the right level of like functional and have their documents and everything. These like opposite standards, right? They've got to have all their documents, but also they have to look like they've had like half their fucking limbs blown off and shit. So it's like yeah, but I
You
mean, do you think it's like it's too strict or not strict enough, like in Europe or America right now?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the United States, I think we're probably about right. The problem that I have though is that we're not dealing with like the push pull factors of like Central and South American and Caribbean immigration. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of places in Central and South America that are basically failed states. These states need assistance. If you don't want people to be constantly immigrating into the United States, then you can't continue to tolerate failed states on your border. You have to assist those places in order to be livable places. So that's kind of where I think there's a certain hypocrisy in the United States where we're like, oh, well, you can't come here, but also I don't care that your country is like a narco state that's basically fueled by like the corruption that's in your state is fueled by American consumption of drugs. I think there's a particular hypocrisy when it comes to that. When it comes to Europe, the y'all probably are too strict. I know that like every American thinks that Europe is like a Disneyland for adults, and everybody like gives hugs across like ethnic and linguistic boundaries, and like like a Brit bonger holds hands with a Frenchman, and a Frenchman holds hands with a Spaniard, and a Spaniard holds hands with a Portuguese person, and then they make their way into Italy, and everybody loves each other and all that kind of shit. I know that's not true. Y'all fucking hate each other more than we hate each other. Like it's fucking crazy. So the point being that like yeah, y'all are probably too strict, but you also have a higher security concern than we do. We are not physically attached to the rest of Eurasia. Anybody in Eurasia can walk to Europe, like they can. Like it'll be arduous, it'll be dangerous, and all that kind of stuff, but they can get to y'all. So I don't mind that higher level of scrutiny because basically you could start in Syria, and you could probably get to Greece or Germany within a month or two. So that's where like that higher level of scrutiny, I understand what you're saying where it feels particularly arbitrary, but I do think that higher level of scrutiny is warranted considering you share land access with the countries that we're talking about.
Yeah, this is where I'm maybe not too sure because
Mm.
again, I feel like a lot of this is completely ignoring like the other reasons that people become segregated or even become radicalized. Because I'm
Mm.
pretty sure most people who get radicalized in Europe were born here,
Yeah, it tends to be second
like ISIS
generation.
fighters and all. Yeah, and that's because they grow up in this really weird world where they don't really identify with the values of the old country, like their very conservative parents. That's why jihadi rap is actually quite popular. Yeah,
Yeah.
7th century jihadi rap, and but they also don't identify with I think the very big problem with the fact that they get the shit bullied out of them. That there's no like cultural figures that they can identify with apart from like Shamima Begum maybe
Yeah.
so um I think when it comes to and yeah, I would have to wonder whether or not that increased sort of what do you call it that increased worry is really working because uh, I feel like the increased worry and the increased sort of treatment of these people as if they're basically as if they're more religiously extreme and segregated than they actually are. Like that constant othering, the fact that like it's much harder to get a job if you've like got a Muslim name, etc., etc.
Mm.
The social mobility is lower, and uh, yeah, I don't think I agree with that because like the way that the asylum and immigration process is right now is just like I think it's actually contributing to radicalization as much as it's not an excuse. It just is. You know, if you do it to a million people, one person gets radicalized. You know.
Yeah, and this goes back to your earlier point where, you ask some people in your extended family or something like that, did America deserve 9/11? And then they go yes, and then you ask for the more like nuanced answer on that, and they say like, no, the United States involved itself in, the Lebanese conflict with Israel, and then, Osama bin Laden got pissed off because of the slaughter of the phalanges, and then America supported Saudi Arabia during the, Iran-Iraq war, and this, that, the other, and as a result, they created terrorist organizations that ultimately caused 9/11. I don't think you should kill civilians, but ultimately, like, this is the history, and America simultaneously can't be playing politics in Eurasia without expecting any kind of blowback or consequences. So what I would say is that Americans and Europeans and the people in my fucking chat need to stop looking at history as some kind of like Narnia, like fantasy book, where these places are in a completely different time zone. They're irrelevant. The civic principles and histories and people don't really matter. This is all just fantasy that we get to play with because it's interesting, right? What I would say is they need to look at the historical causes and the nuance of all these different factions that are vying for power and resources, realize how these are all impacting each other, and then how do we fix it? So, for instance, while being anxious about jihadist terrorism, I was born in Boston. Boston bombing happened where, Boston bombing obviously happened there. I live in Central Florida. The Pulse nightclub, the big shooting probably in 2016 that killed 50 people, that's 20 minutes from my house. The Bataclan attack, that's a place that I visited when I was a child, and the Bataclan terrorists came from, I forget the name of the city, but it's in Belgium. They came from a certain ghetto in Belgium in which my mother and I used to, we used to shop. Like, we used to go to their thrift store. So terrorism is touching everything. The question is, how do we fix it? And then what I think is interesting about globalization or internationalization as it's occurring right now is a force that it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to control. What's interesting about it is we're opening up these like cross-cultural communication barriers. I have a gentleman in my Discord named Gassim. He's Sudanese. He was Western educated, this, that, the other. 50 years ago, I would not have the ability to understand half of what I know now because of the internet and my ability to communicate with him. The wars, the global war on terror, the wars of intervention, jihadist terrorist attacks, we can either view each other as like aliens, like we're just complete fucking enemies, we can't understand each other, or we can view each other as human beings with different cultures, and we can start trying to figure each other out about why we do what we do and why we believe what we believe. However, I think that this process of understanding each other, one, needs to happen under a liberal framework. And two, you were asking about like language. I do think we need a common language. I think that English should be the language of the United States of America, and people should communicate in English here because that's what most people speak who are native. So if we want that cross-cultural communication, we need to be able to communicate and have like a common set of civic virtues.
Yeah, I mean, so I completely agree on. So I guess the things we agree on are like obviously criminal background, terrorist background, obviously terrorist sympathies. Yeah, I think there is a nuanced way to probably figure that out in someone. So yeah, and then language. Although that said, some people when they bring up language, I don't care if someone who can speak English talks Arabic to their friend in the train. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah,
or if like some of the shop signs are Arabic and English, that's actually quite nice. So
right.
Yeah, like fuck, what was I because we're both talking in like monologues. I'm trying to think of something to focus on.
Sorry if I gave you like 10 fucking points.
Yeah, like the Bataclan attacks is interesting because I think that was actually like partially, I don't think this would have stopped it, but I think part of that was actually just the failure of anti-immigrant rhetoric in some parts because like I don't know if you know the story about the Hungarian train station where a bunch of refugees were stranded at for a very long time because Viktor Orban was basically posturing about getting them out. So he promised them they would get to go on a train to Germany, and then they were they bought tickets twice and the trains never showed up twice, so they were just like this huge crowd like in a complete gray zone. And
Mm.
then that was actually where the leader of the attacks, who stayed in a hotel next door to the station, actually managed to recruit two people, because these people were just like uh probably just reaching a breaking point. Like people were going hungry and shit, and then he just kind of picked them up in his car and said, "Well, I'll take you over, and then we'll do a fucking terrorist attack."
Yeah, yeah,
Meanwhile,
yeah, yeah.
there was no screening process, because all Orban was doing was building little walls in the mainland that everyone could just walk around, and he actually like accidentally directed everyone towards the west when, you know, there was no process there. There was no like, let's take them in, let's document them, let's assist them if they want to go further into Europe, etc., etc. There was none of that. They just let them sit there for 20 days and like percolated. So I thought that was really fucking weird. Shit, I need to actually like ask you
Mm.
think of a question to ask. Why? I think there are some communities in the UK where it's a bit more than 30% non-native. Why is that? Like, is that in itself a problem, or is it just what comes with it? Like, would that be okay if they
Yeah,
all
it's
behaved like?
yeah, it's not for me that. So for instance, like let's say that we already had we already had like multi generations of like integration and cultural assimilation and all that kind of stuff. Everybody spoke the same language. There was signs in Arabic and English. Everybody, white person could walk through the Arabic neighborhood at 11 o'clock at night and not fear being accosted, and also shop at the local businesses without harassment. Arab person could shop at the white businesses in the white neighborhood next door at 11 p.m. without being harassed or beaten or whatever. Then yeah, who gives a shit? Right? The freedom of association. People should be able to associate with whoever they want to associate with. If they happen to associate with people of their own ethnicity or linguistic or ethnic background, then who gives a shit? The problem more for me on the integrative side is I feel like just from a facilitation standpoint, if you interact with people who don't look like you on a daily basis, and you're the immigrant to their country, that's going to force some level of assimilation. If you go to school and 70% of the people don't look like you, you're going to have to assimilate a little bit. If you're speaking a different language, you're going to assimilate a little bit. If you're shopping in the shops of other people, you're going to assimilate a little bit. And that's kind of the thing that can kind of chip away. So I know maybe not a lot of people know this about me, but I actually lived in Belgium for 4 years, and I went to a French school for 4 years. There were things I didn't like, and I was picked on as a foreigner. I was literally beaten up because I spoke a different language. I was beaten up because I was from a different country. It fucking sucked. But what ended up happening was I learned the language and I learned how to fight. and as a result, I was integrated. I was l'Américain. I was the American. So, that's kind of the thing where it's like, obviously I don't want people to be bullied for their backgrounds or their like linguistic heritage or anything like that. But I do think that in order to have that cross-cultural communication, like as an example, that there was actually a school called what was it called? It was called the International School of Brussels. They spoke English. It was an American school. Nobody learned shit about fuck. They were all the sons and daughters of American and British employees who were working in Belgium, and they didn't learn anything about the country that they were living in. They were living in an Anglo enclave in Belgium. They literally could have been anywhere else on the planet. They were just geographically located within Belgium. Whereas because of the conscious choices of my parents to try to integrate into Belgium, I had a completely different and much more rich experience. And I would want to force that onto other people. One, because I think it's fucking great for your brain. And then two, because they are the people who are saving you from a earth-born hell. You owe them an attempt to integrate.
Yeah. Okay. I just wonder, like, how much of that burden, uh, if it's even a burden, like, because you can make the argument the other way around. Like, for the locals, the best thing to make them less xenophobic is to introduce foreigners to the area. It seems to be, the contact theory, et cetera, et cetera. So, I just wonder because, like, with all these, I think the reason I'm just skimming this, like ghetto plan in Denmark. I think the big flaw with it is it's not really addressing the reason so many immigrants live in ghettos. And the problem is a lack of social mobility. And that lack of social mobility is kind of rooted in xenophobia and racism, especially in like these places where like far right parties are getting really popular. And uh, I think as well, like when it comes to like you said yourself, like most of the Bataclan attackers were born in Belgium. Like you couldn't deport them at any point. Like, and I suppose if I was going to make a solution to that, like the idea of like Islamic youths getting radicalized in Europe and America, I feel like whatever your answer is to do it with like white nationalist terrorists, the answer should be the same. There's so much overlap. You know, they're typically like it's like because in both cases it's about identity. It's not really about ideology or religion, really, and it's also like you know they're basically like motivated by the same kind of weird perspectives of masculinity and et cetera, et cetera. And the reason it just happens worse to like Muslims in Europe is because there isn't really that like that effort on the other side isn't really there. Like the hostility towards immigrants only really like got worse after probably from 9/11 onwards. And
Yeah,
I
but
especially just because I find it easier to talk to my own camp, you know, as well. Like,
yeah, so I think there's like a natural predisposition from people to want to associate with people that look like them. Probably the reason why, like even in the United States, as you kind of mentioned, there's ethnic enclaves all over the place is because people want to hang out with people that look like them. There's probably a natural disposition. It doesn't mean that it's good for us. And also on top of that, like, so what I would say is like, yeah, all right, there's a whole bunch of geopolitical factors for why jihadist terrorism occurs. The framing might be religious. The recruitment might be from young, desperate men who don't have anything going for them. And those are like, you can only, this is my frustration with the right wing. They would say, I don't want to straw man. There are portions of the right wing, okay,
hmm.
portions of the right wing that would say that like, oh, this is biological or it's cultural or it's natural or it's this or it's that or it's religion. And guess what? Just like in everything, it's a multivariate series of variables, okay? I don't want to say that it's 0% ideology and 100% geopolitics. I don't want to say it's 0% religion and 100% geopolitics. Chances are that it's all three of these factors playing in together, and for each person, it's probably different. There's probably some religious zealots that have like a hyper jihadist interpretation of the religion, and for them, that's 50% of why they do what they do, and the other 50% is
Hmm.
geopolitics. And then you can just move like you know, if it was like you know, like a soundboard or whatever, you can just move the switches up and down until you reach 100%, and then you'll have like a coherent reason for why people do what they do. The point is, as a society or as a government, there are some variables that you can't control. I don't think you can control biology that much, but there are other factors that you can control, like education, socialization, you know, the way economics is redistributed throughout your society, social
Hmm.
institutions, all of that kind of stuff can be controlled. So you control the variables that you can control, trying to mitigate the variables that you can't, and that's all you can do.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to think of a way I want to steer this because there's a lot of could have mentioned there. Um, hmm. What hmm. What do you think in terms of like hmm fuck. So when it comes to like cultural differences and all that, uh if one say like if it is true that like 13% of Germans would welcome a new Führer,
Hmm.
um should neighboring countries, especially since every neighboring country was at war with Nazi Germany, should they take that into account if a German tries to immigrate there?
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, do you you know, if Nazism becomes a viable political ideology, do you want like a new genetic super race dictator? Fuck yeah. Like I don't know. Like to me that's actually kind of obvious. Like if I was an American and you know, I mean, I'm an American supremacist, right? So
Mhm.
so if America becomes a shithole, it's falling apart, everybody's killing everybody, And then let's say that like Mexico's doing a lot better, so I'm immigrating to Mexico, and they're like, "Hey, are you coming to Mexico in order to establish a neo-American state and to usurp the authority of the Mexican government?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." Like,
Okay, well,
I'm not gonna, I'm
yeah,
not gonna
so that's a
expect to
little bit.
gain entry. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so okay, so that's a little bit different from
I don't
just
know, is it?
expressing the sentiment because I mean, they're like, I guarantee, like, I don't know about like Americans, but like our British, like, we're still a fairly liberal country in the UK. It's getting worse, but if you
Mhm.
pull some of the people in the UK on like crime and punishment and like even democracy itself, you'll get the fucking most like proto-fascist answers like possible. And I'm just wondering, like, I just don't. I think that's why there's a big difference. There's like the intentions versus the way that they like the way
Mhm.
that they just express their politics.
Well, right, but let's say that like there was a bunch of neo-fascists in Britain, right? Let's say that like 50% of it is neo-fascist, and
Hmm.
let's say that they were like fascist sympathizing elements within the United States, and because of a civil war between like liberal democracy supporters and fascists in the UK, the UK becomes a failed state, and everybody wants to immigrate to the United States. If the United States was a liberal democracy, and there's a whole bunch of people who are trying to escape the war, if there were people who are sympathizing with the fascists, we don't fucking need you. Like, what the fuck? Like, you're seeking asylum. So either accept liberal democracy as the way that we're going to do things, because by the way, you're the one who needs help. You're the one
Yeah,
who needs something from us. There's a power imbalance, but that power imbalance, we are not moral equals. So if you have a morally objectionable thing that you want that we are not willing to accept, you can either accept our deal of we will offer you refuge and safety and health and education and all that kind of stuff and ditch your shitty ideology, or you can hold on to your shitty ideology over there. And that's
yeah.
the thing is like, sorry, just really quickly.
Mm,
This is my frustration with liberals because I think a lot of people have recognized correctly that like I'm a liberal in a lot of ways. I'm a statist. I believe in redistributive economics and all that kind of stuff. But I'm more hawkish on immigration, and I'm way more libertarian on guns and probably drugs than a lot of liberals are. So liberals don't have spines, and that's a problem. And liberals need to stand up and they need to say, we have expectations of our society and we're going to enforce those expectations.
mm. Yeah. So I completely agree with that analogy. Like, if there's a civil war between like fascists and liberals in one country, and then a bunch of fascists from another country want to come in at once, and like, yeah, then you can start to like hesitate if that's how they were like expressing themselves in their old country and as well. The problem I have with that analogy, and I've heard people bring it up like a lot before, like, oh, what would you do if like 3 million groypers took refuge in the UK, wherever? Like, um, I'm okay with conceding that. The problem is, I know that that analogy is being used as analogous for like Muslims coming into Europe and America, right? And that's why I just don't think the analogies are remotely comparable. Like you said yourself, like
Mhm.
the Bataclan attackers were mostly born in Europe, and their parents came to Europe when jihadism didn't even really exist. So there was
Yeah.
no way to control for the like ideological motivation there, apart from they could have maybe been treated better at home and et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah, and
um,
if I can clarify, because obviously I'm going to have more right wingers in my audience. There is a distinction here that's important. Okay, so Muslim is just somebody who follows the religion of Islam. There's an incredible diversity in people who follow that religion. It does not mean anything in and of itself. Islamist means somebody
mm,
who believes in theocracy. They want, Sharia. They want the Quran to be a guiding force within the state. But there are a shitload of ways to implement that. From it being like simply like a consultative thing that informs law to and informs in the weakest of terms to it literally being like, no, we're gonna live like we're in like 7th century AD Saudi Arabia. There's a wide spectrum
mm,
of interpreting the concept of Islamism, and then jihadism is very specifically the use of violence or force in order to implement a like Islamist agenda. So there are people like I would even say Islamists can exist in a liberal democracy as long as they don't advocate for violence. I would say that Muslims can obviously exist in a liberal democracy as long as they don't advocate for violence. It's literally that last portion that I think should not be accepted. And it's really anybody who sympathizes with that last portion. We should be able to say at the
Mm.
border, you need to give up your sympathy for these motherfuckers or else you can't come in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if there's any like if there's any indication that this even happens at the border. If there are actually refugees who are like, no, you're going to take me in like arms folded,
Sure.
and I'm still going to say that like ISIS did nothing wrong. I don't know.
No, okay, it's not because they're not going to admit that, right? So that's
Mm,
why I think it's important. Like, so for instance, like let's say we were going to take like 3 million Groypers. They escaped to Italy. They formed like a trad cath cat boy neo fascist state. It failed. They're trying to come back to the United States, right? I think it would
mm.
be okay if they were like, hey, we renounce violence. We don't want anything to do with that shit, but we still believe in trad cath cat boy philosophy, right? I think it would be okay to say, okay, you were gone for a while. Trad cath cat boy philosophy is not, synonymous with liberal democracy in the United States. You're going to take like an 8-week civic educational course in order to make sure that you understand what's expected out of you while you come here. I don't feel like that's a severe imposition if they're trying to escape death or great bodily harm.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I think maybe the problem that happens the problem that happens in Europe with the immigration systems is that people in your chat are doing this as well. I'm peeking.
Fuck my chat. I'm not
People
even looking
have
at
this. I know my chat's being
it.
weird as well. It's all right. So the thing is, like, people have this fundamental confusion of like very conservative, very traditional Islam and jihadism, right?
Hmm.
These two are like freakishly opposite. Like fucking Poika in your chat, this little dumb fuck saying like Sharia directly contradicts the American and French constitutions. Most people who live by Sharia in Europe consider Sharia a lifestyle. They have never like there's no indication of them like to any degree advocate like making any effort to try and make Sharia like something for anyone else. It's just for them and like maybe their families, like in the same way other parents try to influence their families. Like that's it. So this thing with like, and I think this is where the problem is like people. I feel like the just like the understanding of these differences within Islam is so like low. Like I can't really emphasize enough just how like not very religious jihadists are. Like they just don't behave in like suicide bombing's not in the Quran. Having a fucking online footprint the size of a fucking 13-year-old suburban Tumblr girl is not in the Quran. Like these people behave in like a very strange, like set, like all like modern way. And even if you look at their reasoning, you listen to like what like Bin Laden's speeches were after 9/11. Like they were all like his reasoning was all secular. It was all
Mm.
foreign policy this and like oh they've humiliated our countries. They've like it had more to do with like masculinity than it had to do with Islam. So I think people need to be like really cautious with that. Is like just because you see like a conservative Muslim and they have these views and they talk about Sharia, it means absolutely nothing. Like,
And so the only I don't have any like pushback there. I have like an addendum. I
mhm,
would invite anybody who basically doesn't believe what we're saying or whatever to just read the Quran. It's like a 14-hour audiobook. If you do it on 2 times
mhm,
speed, you can be done in 7 hours. The second half is a little rough. The first half is pretty good. And what I would say is like we're not just talking about the Quran, we're also talking about the Hadith, and we're not just talking about the
mhm,
Hadith, we're also talking about how people live their lives. Just because like so I was raised culturally Christian. Most Christians I know, I think they're called like there's a word for it, but it's like Easter Christians, Easter and Christmas Christians. They literally show up like twice a year. They don't keep any of the stuff that they're supposed to. They don't pay attention to the religion. I'm not going to deny that the Islamic world is probably more devout than the Western world, but at the same time, that I would say like the way people live, religion is only one facet of this calculation, and on top of that, it's probably the least controllable. As Poika will probably understand, our Constitution prohibits our ability to discriminate against each other based off of religion. So we can't enshrine to our Constitution that Christianity is the only way to be or secular atheism is the only way to be. So religion is not the thing that we can control. Maybe we can encourage imams with certain translations to, be more public with their interpretations that are more peaceful. And then when it comes to the geopolitical factors, those are factors we can control. How we interact with the Middle East and North Africa, how we treat people who are asylees, how we treat people who are, immigrants, like all that kind of stuff. Those are all variables that we can control that can help reduce like the cultural and civic strife and all that kind of stuff. And basically to reaffirm that like Osama bin Laden was primarily motivated by geopolitics, two of the major reasons that he cited for why he did the 9/11 attacks is number one, the United States of America backing Israel during their invasion of the Lebanon that resulted in the slaughter of like 2,800 Muslims at the hands of the Christian Phalanges, which was a militia group in Lebanon. And then the other one was Saudi Arabia calling on the United States to defend its border during the Iran-Iraq war and during the war in the Persian Gulf, the first one in Kuwait. So those were there's religious framing of kafir or foreigners or infidels or whatever being invited onto holy Saudi soil. That it's a religious framing, but the actual contention is geopolitical, that these forces are killing Muslims in Muslim lands, and that's the motivation for jihadist terrorism. So Loner, like for you and me, I probably wouldn't disentangle these things as much, but I do think that they need to be considered different variables in the equation, and we need to focus on the variables that we can control. So yeah, I'd leave it there.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's like kind of really well put, because especially like I think this whole narrative of like, the secular West and the Islamic East is just so like how much overlap can you think of, like the fact that like the like you've got the liberal West funding Saudi Arabia, which where the monarchy directly supports terrorism to a greater degree than like any other individual body in the world. So you just have like there's this constant like interweaving of interests, and then you get like all the the Muslim feminists and in Saudi Arabia who like host little radio shows and fear for their lives every day as they're just trying to express their feminist opinions on like secret internet channels and things like that. So yeah, it's yeah, there is like a there's like a big conflict of interest with these
things. I would actually like to back this up and point something out that's fairly interesting. This is something that you're going to read in the Quran. So like Muhammad was born into peace be upon him. He was born into a pagan society, and in this pagan society, female infanticide was completely normal. Basically, people would have girl babies and they would just throw them out into the desert because they wanted boys. And so one of the things that Islam actually did is it ended female infanticide. And so that's kind of the thing is like, do I think that like Islam is actually feminist? Not really. Like not like, I don't think like the burqa or the hijab or whatever. I don't think these are like feminist things. But is there a way to make an argument as like an individual Muslim that like Islam, especially when it was born, was progressive for its time, that it was a universalist religion, and that the way that I choose to express my religious faith through sexual modesty in the way that I dress is actually feminist, because I'm choosing to express myself in the way that I think helps forward my own femininity in line with my values. I think there's a lot there that maybe is born of some level of like cultural conflict, but every identity is born of cultural conflict. I am an Irish person living in an English colonial society defending civic nationalist virtues to a Brit bonger who's not even really a Brit bonger because his family came from, I don't know your full family history, but you mentioned that you were kind of like part of your family.
Yeah.
Right, Lebanese. Right. Yeah, so the world's a confusing and multivariated and multifaceted place, and all we can do is identify the variables that we can control and then try to control them as best we can. So that's what I try to do anyways.
Yeah, fuck, I was about to up since 6 a.m. I'm like
okay, falling out.
Just trying to pull my concentration together. Yeah. I mean, like the thing is, like I grew up and I spent a few years in like living in Dubai as well as Lebanon and Cyprus and things like that. Like, I mean, I've always had like interaction with like I very often had interactions with majority Muslim environments. I don't really like Islam. It's a monotheistic religion. It's old. It's fucking like got really weird. Like it's it's full of fucking laws. Like I don't know if you've ever dated a Muslim. It's like dating. It's like worse than dating a vegetarian. Like all the things. But like again, it's like that kind of like the modernization process is like. I don't think it really gets documented. It's like the extent to which it's already happening, especially the way that like imams, people talk about radicalization in mosques. It's like that really dumb fuck right wing thing. Like mosques have like no control over Muslim youths like anymore. Like it's all online. It's either like some of the people online are like crazy radicals, and most of them are just like these kind of quirky online sort of imams who are usually quite young, and if they're asked a question about masturbation, they'll just kind of awkwardly laugh as if to say, "Yeah, I don't care," like that kind of thing. Um, okay, maybe I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
What happened with Irish immigrants in America and Italians?
Oh, I
Do you
mean,
see that future? No, I was saying, do you see that future like as being any different for Muslims in the next 20, 30 years in Europe?
nah, I don't. I think that like this is all born like that doesn't mean that there aren't cultural conflicts, right?
Mm.
So, for instance, like the Irish all came at one time. They flooded the labor market. They were Catholic. They had a fuckload of kids. Some of them only spoke Gaelic and weren't interested in learning English. They set themselves up in ethnic enclaves, and they had disproportionate amounts of crime due to like material circumstances and all that kind of stuff. Germans, you can actually go back and look at, you can look at Benjamin Franklin being worried about how quickly Germans were coming to the United States of America. He feared that German culture would dominate American society, and as a result, it would become a Germanic European colonial experiment instead of an Anglo-European colonial experiment. So we've had these anxieties and fears, and on top of that, that doesn't mean that there weren't cultural conflicts. Like we had like I was literally watching Gangs of New York the other day. We've had like race riots, we've had ethnic riots along Irish, Anglo, Germanic, lines. Chinese lines, African lines. So we've had cultural tensions, but then ultimately, if you look at kind of what's happened over the past century, is we've deracinated in the extent that like we no longer identify with our ethnic heritage. We have a shared civic heritage in the United States of America. For some people, including me, that's enough. I think it's enough to unify me with other Americans. The problems and the fears that I have is that not everybody shares my value set. Not everybody believes that freedom of conscience or freedom of speech is important. Not everybody believes that the right to self-defense, including against the state, is important. That's scary to me. Not everybody believes that the government should follow its own laws. Some people believe that the government should exercise its power as long as they're implementing the agenda that is beneficial to them. That's very scary to me. Because even if we've faced similar threats in the past as a society, I think it's the belief in these civic virtues that has held us together. So that's why I try to promote it on a public stage, because I'm very worried. But that's my job. I'm in my 30s. I'm halfway through my life. It's my job to worry about the next generation. So I fulfill my social role, and then young people can be crazy and brash and annoying and stupid, and then they'll learn their lessons the hard way, and that's their role as well.
Yeah. What do you think about? Fuck, what was I going to say? Shit. I had a really direct question and it just disappeared.
It's okay. I got time. 6 a.m.'s kicking your ass.
Oh, it's fine. I'm over the line now. It's all the same. It's all the same hours now. Oh, fuck. I'll write it down next time. I was gonna ask. Oh yeah, that Middle Eastern like support for authoritarianism. You mentioned it a few times. Do you see any indication of that like manifesting itself in Europe?
No, but there's a couple of organizations that scared the shit out of me. Hizb ut-Tahrir in Australia, they're an open Islamist organization. The Muslim Brotherhood is another organization that scares me. They have worldwide chapters, all that kind of stuff. I forget this gentleman's name, but he talked to Sam Harris. He's not Reza Aslan. Damn it. Reza Aslan and this guy hate each other. I
Okay.
forget, but he's Egyptian. He was originally an imam for the Muslim Brotherhood. He tried to recruit people in order to overthrow the Egyptian government, and then he was caught. He was jailed. A jihadist terrorist that he talked to actually died in prison next to him. That was part of his realization that he wasn't as bought into the Islamist project as much as he was. And
So
when
imagine there was.
Majid was, yeah.
Yeah.
So he came back, and at least his story, the way that he tells it, is he wants to integrate these cultures. He wants to be a bridge between the Islamic world and between the secular, more secular, liberal, democratic United Kingdom, and he doesn't view these worlds as culturally incompatible. And so, I think that these people are important because they can serve as the cultural bridge, and then the other option is killing the shit out of each other. So I don't think killing the shit out of each other should be on the table. I think building cultural bridges and understanding each other and moving towards a more culturally compatible version is better. So.
Yeah, I kind of hate Majid Nawaz, but I know like
okay.
the de-radicalization. I know the de-radicalization stuff he actually did was quite good. He's just he just went off the deep end after that.
We all do.
Like,
so.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we don't really disagree on that much. I think that maybe the question is like, when it comes to immigration, like, I do like. I think like ideally, I think immigration should just be I like that place. I'm going to go there. That's it. Like that's all it should be. It shouldn't be my country's a shithole because 100 years ago, like the other white country like took all the shit and then left like a long chain of militias and paramilitaries afterwards so that we could never recover. But obviously that's not the world we live in. And I think the most likely thing now is that given climate change and destabilization is we're going to have like the only foreseeable future. We can try to build up parts of the world as much as we can, but I think the foreseeable future is more likely just a fuck ton of refugees coming from all over the place. What do you think about that? Like,
yeah, I think it's possible, but also what I think is necessary is like we waited on the baby boomers to save us. We're still waiting on the baby boomers to save us, and it's not going to happen. Baby boomers are on their way out. They don't seem interested in the political solutions that seem to actually address the issues that we're talking about, whether that's climate change or refugee crises or mass immigration or violence or liberal democracy or neo-fascism or anything like that. They don't seem interested in solving any of ththose problems. So if they're not interested in solving the problems, then it's up to us. And that means that we can't bitch about like when we're handed the reins of power because baby boomers are not going to live forever. And Gen X, by the way, is a very small generation, so chances are millennials are going to be the next people at bat when it comes to power. So if millennials are handed the power, then we have to do something with it. We actually have to focus on technologies that are going to help us get past climate change. We're going to have to focus on carbon capture. We're going to have to address how do developing nations develop at the same time as they're, basically we developed off of coal and fossil fuels. How do we encourage people to develop in a different way that isn't detrimental to the environment? What's the balance of the population? Is demographic collapse going to be a problem for our economics? Is automation on the way? And is it going to be able to offset some of the things that we're looking at with like lower birth rates that are happening internationally? So these are all problems that we have to do, and I'm hopeful that some of these technologies will help facilitate this. The fact that like, so for instance, like we're on Discord right now. You're in a different country. There's a few hundred to a few thousand people watching us. That this is awesome. This is great technology, and it can be harnessed towards solutions, or it can be harnessed towards us killing the shit out of each other. And it's really ultimately up to us how we use these tools.
Yeah. What do you think about like the fact that there are probably going to be? I feel like I asked you this during the Afghanistan question about like accepting refugees into Afghanistan, and you sound. I think you might have said the people who fought alongside coalition forces, yes, but I think you maybe said everyone else no, or what was the position there?
Yeah, so I think there's a difference here. So the people who fought for us that are under like threat of imminent death or great bodily harm, the people who want to stay, I literally think they should drop off their families and then turn back around and go fight for it. And then when it comes to because again, we had like 10,000 troops in Afghanistan for 20 years that held off the Taliban. 10,000 troops of like well-trained crack infantry could probably take back the country. The question is whether or not there's like popular support. And so that's where this is what's frustrating to me about this dynamic in particular is the Taliban steamrolled Afghanistan in like less than 6 months, right?
Mhm.
That means that there's some level of either social apathy or social support for the Taliban coming back into power. So I think it's fucked up to, on one hand, basically let your country be steamrolled by a bunch of authoritarian dickheads, but on the other hand, demand that you leave. So that's kind of where it's like, I understand that there's real security concerns for people who like worked for the Afghan National Army or the Afghan central government. Let's protect their families. Let's protect them if they want to stay. But if so, for instance, in the Panjshir region, there's like a bunch of rebels. If they want
Yeah.
support, then we should use them as leverage with the Taliban government to say you can either offer actual democratic representation to the Turkmen, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, all the ethnic groups that you've typically excluded from power. You can either bring them to the table, or we're going to support people who want to fight you. And I think that's a good way to do it.
Didn't the Panjshir rebels get defeated? Didn't Panjshir fall like not too long ago?
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically
So fuck
um
it. So fuck it. You made your bed, you sleep in it. That's pretty much where I'm at. So
really, so
yeah.
like a refugee turns up to America somehow, I don't know,
Right.
and says like, you know, fuck that. I'm not fighting these wankers. There's too many of them. They got Pakistan next door. Sorry. Like, can I come here? You'd say no?
I don't know. It depends. Are they under threat of death or great bodily harm?
If they live in Afghanistan, yeah, probably persecution and et cetera, et cetera. And just the fact that they live under a failed
Well,
state. It's like, yeah,
okay, but this is part of my problem, and I might have to go use the restroom in a second, so you're gonna have to forgive me. But
it's all right.
the basically, this is the thing. This exists over like 30 or 40% of the world. So is the
Hmm.
solution to failed states everybody moves to the United States?
No, because like yeah, like okay, we actually already have that though. International law is
Mm.
already if they turn up at your borders and they've come from a country that's not safe, then that's a successful asylum claim. So we already have that, and we don't have this open floodgate because it's fucking hard. It's really
Mm.
hard to like get on a fucking boat where the chance of dying can be like 1 in 20 on a bad year. So
Mm.
that's like yeah, that's like a fucking huge problem. Sorry, Kulivar, fucking Kulivar in your chat. How is a refugee our problem? Because we're an international economy, you fucking idiot. Like I don't know if you've heard like the Martin Luther King quote that like we depend on half the world by the time we finish breakfast. We're an integrated geopolitical system across the world. What we do here and what we have here is in part because of what other people don't have somewhere else. So yeah, if you've got like two of the biggest empires like Britain and America, who basically like built themselves off of destabilization in other parts of the world partially, then yeah, that is kind of an obligation. Sorry, but
No,
yeah,
it's
that's the question. Like we've already had like technically all of the world is an open floodgate for immigrants, like for refugees. Refugees can go wherever the fuck they want under international law. So
yeah, but is that
um,
okay? But okay, so this is the thing. Like, I understand that like morality and legality oftentimes intertwine, but like from a moral standpoint. So Afghanistan, I don't know, 3,000, 5,000 miles away. I'd literally have to Google it. Shit, it might be more than that, right?
long
Um,
ways away.
right. So there are people who helped us in our attempt to nation build. Those people and their families are under threat of death or great bodily harm. Those people assisted us in our project. I think we have a moral obligation to try to help those people. If there were people who lived under the Taliban 30 or 40 years ago, they lived under the ANA for 20 years, and now they're living under the Taliban again, and their material circumstances has changed or has not changed. The threat to their lives has not changed. Their material circumstances has not changed. Under any regime that they've been a part of, I don't think we have some moral duty to help that person. They're living in the same country that they lived in 30 years ago. Like, what the fuck? Like, why we wouldn't apply this standard for anything? We wouldn't even apply the standard for ourselves. Like, does like Japan, like let's say like America becomes like a failed state, does like China have like a moral obligation to take us? Does Japan have a moral obligation to take us? Does the UK have a moral obligation to take us if it's our fault that our country has fallen apart and it sucks? Like, what is this logic?
Well, you just said it's our fault. I mean, it's not always the people. It's not always the fault of it's just like the average punter living there that their country becomes a failed state, right?
I would say that it is a socio-cultural phenomenon whether or not there's a functional government or a functional state. Absolutely. And I think that any collective enterprise is made up of individuals. So, yeah, I do think it's the fault of people who participate in the system, whether or not that system functions.
Well, like power, it doesn't take that many people to do like a power grab. I mean, obviously the Taliban are
Sure.
not like close to the majority of the people in Afghanistan.
Yeah, but the people in Afghanistan could overthrow them at any point, and they chose not to.
Uh,
This is how power works, by the way. This is one of
are
the.
you?
No, I'm
I feel like we had that's just like this strangest like it's not even falsifiable. It's just
yeah,
mad. Like, what?
yeah, okay, but this is where we fundamentally disagree. So
Okay.
10,000, like what was it? It was like maybe 10,000 assholes seized my capital 6 months ago, and if they had a plan, they actually could have done some damage, but they didn't because they didn't have a plan, and they outnumbered the cops like thousands to one. Like the people hold the power. This is nothing new. It doesn't matter what kind of tech you have. It doesn't matter what kind of authoritarian bullshit you have. Like, yeah, sure, you can kill individuals, but ultimately, states like the existence of a state and its ability to propagate its own power is reliant on some level of the consent of the governed. It doesn't matter how authoritarian the state is.
I I don't even know. It's I feel like it's an unarguable like point. Um, okay, that's fine. I'll just skip over that. I might have to think about it. Fuck. Okay. Yeah. So what about you were saying that like that idea of so do you actually like is there something about I know there are people in your chat saying that like domestic law trumps international law and et cetera, et cetera. So do you actually like not agree with that international standard that like refugees have a right to go to other places if they're like
No, I think they have a right, but I also think that this isn't like an unlimited right. Like, so for instance, like if again, let's use the United States. Let's just invert the morality real quick. United States becomes a failed state. I fly to Monaco, despite like Canada being a safe alternative. I Mexico being a safer alternative, like Central America being a safer alternative. If I am somehow able to charter a flight to Monaco, does Monaco have like a moral duty to house me as a citizen or like as an
um
immigrant?
yeah, I mean that's why you do get like that's why the EU is like well technically a good idea because if uh some countries are too poor then yeah they're like that's why the whole first safe country isn't really a thing. So but yeah, I think typically if a country that has an asylum process is obligated to hear your case, yeah, because I don't think it's like I think it's a fundamental human right as a global as someone of the world to not have to exist uh in a failed state, in a state where they are at risk of like where there's war or persecution, etc.,
How
etc.
okay, but how do failed states become not failed states? How do civil wars end?
I have no idea. There could be like a million different ways, especially with what you're talking about. The Taliban is like the Taliban isn't just like a small number of like wallopers running around the country. There's an international network in there. Like there's connections to Pakistan, and like funding is a massive thing as well that like a local insurgency doesn't have access to.
Okay,
And not to
the
mention
the
like
the ANA had $50 billion a year for 20 years, and it had the backing of the world's most powerful military for 20 years. And they squandered that opportunity for so
hmm.
long that the world's most powerful military said, "Fuck it, you're on your own." That's what happened.
Yeah,
So
so again, like the people of Afghanistan got fucked by the ANA as well. Like well, half of them were living in poverty by the time the
the
ANA
you
were done.
can't
So
you can't disassociate the people from Afghanistan from the ANA. They're one and the same. The people of Afghanistan, they picked who they wanted to be in power through their apathy. This is fundamental. And just to answer my own question, because I asked it, the way civil wars end is people with a collective vision and the willingness to kill other people and to die for that vision. They win, and then they win power, and then they hold power, and then they implement their vision either positively or negatively. That's how civil wars end. So what I would say is that yeah, sure. Like, should kids have to live in a war zone because they were through virtue of birth? No. Should women who are not interested in participating in conflict have to endure war? No. Refugees, whatever. But the problem that I have when having this conversation is there seems to be like no moral duty for anyone in a failed state or a state that's in civil war to improve the society. Like you're so like you're saying that it's the right of them to flee. Okay, yeah, maybe they have like a legalistic right to flee. But I also think that anybody who's born into any society ever has like a social duty to try to improve the society that they're born a part of. And here's the thing, like I understand that it would be like hypocritical if I was like an individual who was just like, oh yeah, people who are born in fucking civil war and torn societies have to fight the wars that their fathers created for them. But I'm somebody who did this. Like 9/11 happened. I volunteered for military service. My community is not the best that it could be. I volunteered to be a law enforcement officer. And what I keep hearing is this abdication of responsibility to improve society, and frankly it's disheartening, it's frustrating, it's scary.
Okay, I don't want to take anything away from your experience, and if I was American, I would say thank you for your service and all that. I'm just, you're not going to compare that experience to like some local in Afghanistan, like starting from nothing, taking up a soapbox and trying to start a movement against the fucking Taliban, are you?
I am. Yeah. I am, because the thing about it is, I'm not talking about a soapbox or a democratic process. They had 20 years to prepare for this eventuality. They had $50 billion a year. They had support from the world's largest military, and they squandered that opportunity. This is their responsibility. This is the ANA and the ANP's responsibility, who are staffed of Afghan citizens. If Afghan citizens wanted the central government to stand, the central government would still be standing. If the ANA and ANP wanted to take advantage of the training and the material resources that they were handed for 20 years, they would still be standing. They're not. These were decisions that were made on an individual and a cultural and social basis. This is the result of the consequence. These are the consequences of decisions that have been 20 years in the making. I can't like so for instance, like I think the reason why you might be frustrated with my perspective is because you're looking at the situation as it exists now, and you're saying, if I was an Afghan citizen, is it my moral duty under threat of death to stand on a soapbox and espouse the virtues of secular democracy under threat of being executed by the Taliban? No, probably not. But was it the moral duty of the ANA and the ANP and the central Afghan government to take advantage of $50 billion a year of funding and also some of the best military training and equipment that was available in order to stave off the Taliban and stave off Pakistani influence? It was. And they failed in that duty. They have to sleep in that bed.
Yeah, okay. I feel like I'm just kind of busking on a very odd argument here. But again, like Afghanistan has demonstrated like in the past that it has had like its population have had very like secular ambitions. They were probably one of the most secular Muslim countries in the Muslim world. And not even like 1970s and 80s. Even their communist party was like independent of the Soviet Union. So that they have had that like ambition amongst themselves. I just find it like kind of a weird theory that this is like this kind of like bootstrapping, that how it just kind of they just spontaneously lost that spirit, or could it maybe be because just
they didn't lose that spirit? They didn't lose that spirit. They chose who rules the government. That's what happened. The Afghan people made a choice. They said that fuck it, the Taliban are all right. That's literally what happened. Like that's, I don't know what to tell you. And then so on top of that,
changed their minds for some reason.
They didn't change their mind. They never changed their mind in the first place. They didn't buy into the American bullshit. They've seen empires come and go in Afghanistan for the past, like, I don't know, millennia. They know that the people who come to Afghanistan are not interested enough in the fucking, they're not interested enough in the project of building Afghanistan. So it's a temporary thing. So you need to get yours until the people leave. Literally, this was like, I think this saying was said in like 2004, by the way. It was, Americans have the watches and Afghans have the time. And what that means is we have all the things that we want to do based off of a Western cultural perception of time and logistics and military and all that kind of stuff. And all the Afghans, or the Taliban in particular, have to do is wait us the fuck out. So this was on the wall. I could have told you that Afghanistan was going to fall like a wet like pile of cards, like literally like a house of cards that was like sopping wet in KY jelly. I could have told you that shit in 2011 because literally everything that I was getting from everybody on the ground was the AMP is not interested in training. The ANA is corrupt. The ANA is selling their own gear. Any logistical support that we provide is being gutted the second that we give it to them. The second we turn over a base, they're gutting the copper wiring out of the air conditioning units and the central communication sections that we're giving them. Anything that we're giving them is ending up in the bazaar a second later. I don't care if you blame material conditions. I don't care if you blame poverty or desperation or history or anything like that. That's totally fine. But at the same time, this was a choice. It was a choice that the Afghan people made. And then on top of that, talking about how Afghanistan was like the most secular, like, Muslim majority nation or whatever the fuck you want to call it in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, in the 70s, I'm pretty sure like the communists like started having more influence in governance. And I'm pretty sure during the 80s, they were taken on by like the Soviets who like murdered like 2 billion people over the course of a decade. Like, I don't know if that's like the strength, like the strong point that you think it is, because ultimately what happened was a flat out rejection of this like secular communistic philosophy as Afghanistan is a buffer state. So I don't think that has anything to do with anything.
Well, yeah, because I think before, like, so the fact is that they were, as far as I remember, it's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I remember, when they were that secular-ish state, that was before they were caught between two global superpowers as one little country. You don't think that kind of like has a pretty, like, I don't know what it's like to be caught between two global superpowers. That's why I could never sit here in like my little Western kind of safe space and just say that like it's on them for what happened to them, because like I don't know. I don't know what happens to like the like national spirit or like the collective consciousness when you've got that happening to you. Like first it was the Soviet Union, then it was America. Like that's, and then you've got obviously the external forces as well. So
Yeah,
but that's the point, is like before they were brought into international politics, they were one of the more secularizing Muslim countries. So it sounds like that change happened after.
no. There's no beautiful prehistory before international intervention. As a matter of fact, like, I mean, if you look at Afghanistan, it's basically like, what was it? It was like the, obviously they had their own local people who were a part of like the Silk Road and the Silk Road trade, and they were merchants and people who helped other people on their journey and all that kind of stuff. And then you had the Mongolians, and then you had the Mughals, and then you had the Abbasid Caliphate, and then you had the English colonial settlement and their attempted incursions, and then not even to mention like Alexander the Great, like long before.
Yeah. So we're talking about that. We're talking about a long time before, but again, yeah, that's the difference between a country being invaded and a country not being invaded, right?
What do you mean?
As in that period of secularization in the Middle East was when they were not being invaded, right?
I don't know, because it probably only happened for about a decade before the Soviet Union invaded. So, like, is a decade a worthwhile amount of time to consider in the scope of history? And on top of that,
well,
was that a program that was going to ultimately face completion, or was the ISI in Pakistan and the United States able to capitalize on a reactionary religious movement that was directly opposed to the secularization and communist ambitions of like Soviet Russia and the local Communist Party? Like that's the thing. It's like you can look at Kabul, like Kabul. Kabul was like the main place that had like more westernized advertising. They had like women who weren't wearing hijabs and their like beauty salon advertising. Well, the first thing that happened was the people who invaded the metropolitan cosmopolitan city was they ripped all that shit down. So just because like you have like two pictures from 1979 where two girls were going to college in Kabul is not indicative of an entire society moving in that direction. This would be like I don't even want to make an analogy, because like this would be like taking a picture in New York downtown and being like America is a cosmopolitan Uber city. Like, no, it's not.
It's not just like a few trivial pictures. These were active legislations made by like I think Democratic in Iran. I'm pretty sure it was Democratic. There were free elections in Afghanistan as well. This was the mass of the populace actively deciding to do things like taking power away from Islamic nobles, like like a kind of like proto welfare state in Iran, and then like in Afghanistan, it was the case of like introducing women's rights and women's education. These were active decisions. There's not just
Mhm.
it's not as trivial like as just a
So what
couple of
happened?
pictures. Like,
So what happened?
well, what happened is first of all they got there's a really good documentary on it called the I think it's called God Strikes Back. I think one thing was that the Soviets invaded, and then after that the Mujahideen were used as a kind of proxy by Western forces, and then you just find like this kind of then within that conflict and within that kind of disillusionment uh, with Western influence or with secular influence, then that creates a kind of, and the fact that it's just a war, people are dying and shit,
Mhm.
that creates a kind of breeding ground for religious extremists. Same thing in Iran, you know, like Iran chose, the last time Iran had a proper democracy, they chose secularism, and then the Americans were like, fuck off, and then they brought in the Shah, and then it's like another 20, 30 years of like military rule, and basically like Western forces and like the Shah as well, using every like arm of power that they had to crush any kind of secular leftist opposition. And then you leave this massive alienation, massive dissatisfaction. You leave a perfect opening for Islamic radicals to say, look, this is what secularization does to you. And yeah, this is like, you know, is that, but there has to be a void for people like the Taliban to come into, right?
Yes, in okay, yeah. So like, I don't think we so much as disagreed with each other as much as like we continue to describe with more and more nuance the situation. There has to be a power vacuum in order for power to be seized. Like that's true. But like in order for power to have any level of legitimacy or continuity, it has to have some level of consent or popularity. And that's kind of where what I'm saying, like, you know, if Panjshir fell already, and it's been like 3 months, it's because there wasn't popular support for it. People weren't willing to back it with money, logistics, arms, or anything like that. That's why it fell. It didn't fall just because 10 dudes with AKs couldn't fight off 1,000 dudes with AKs. There's more to than that. Military is primary. Like military force is primarily logistics. That's part of the reason why the Americans are so goddamn good at it. So, like, the thing about it is, in order for logistics chains to work, you have to have access. So, if we don't have access to vast swaths of the country, if the Taliban are able to rule with impunity through vast swaths of the country, if it fell apart almost overnight, that wouldn't be indicative to me of, oh, the Afghans secretly love the central government. They love the ANA. They love the ANP. They wanted to fight for it so hard. They just found that they couldn't for ABC reason. What that tells me is that the ANA and ANP kind of, as I've been told for the past 2 decades by people who have served with them, is that they're corrupt. They were kleptocratic. They gutted their own material logistical support that was provided by Western forces. They didn't take it seriously. 30% of the army was existed only on paper. Half of the stuff that we provided to them was literally sold on the bazaar a week later. And as a result, we were pouring money into a bucket with a hole in the bottom of it. So eventually we said, fuck it. It's not getting better. We're going to pull out. And Biden's just the asshole who happened to pull out. And now he's left holding the bag of flaming shit. So, no, like, I think we have a moral duty to the people who actually tried to help us realize our vision. I don't think we have a moral duty to every single person who lives in a failed state. I don't think it's like logistically possible.
It already happens, though. That's already what we do.
Yeah.
People who
And
come from a legitimately failed state and arrive here get accepted through the asylum process. So, how is it logistically
how is
not possible?
okay, so should we just let like all of Central America, because half of Central America are failed states, should every single one of them just move to the United States tomorrow?
Well, they're not doing it though, because again, like you know, despite living in a failed state, it seems to be the case that lots of people just choose not to move for whatever reason. You know, because moving is still a very big thing, and they might have whatever reason to not make that move. That's why, again, you know, like most of the refugees from Syria could have gone to Europe. The Balkan route was open. They could have gone. They didn't. They stayed in Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan. So
Right.
yeah, and this is with this is with effectively international open borders for refugees. Like that's what we have.
Sure. And here's my thing. Like, I'm, I know we're coming up on time, and I need to
Hmm.
go shoot digital people in the face for video games for entertainment. But basically, like, what I would say is like I do think we have like a certain extent of like moral duties or whatever. Integration and assimilation is a bigger, really big part of what I care about. The civic foundations of liberalism are something that I very much care about. And I don't see enough people. I don't see liberals with a spine. I don't see people who talk about like liberal democracies and what makes them work and why they need to be defended and why the populace needs to be educated about it. That's kind of why I do what I do. And then when it comes to like moral obligation to other people, I understand legalistically you're saying this is a system that we already have, but speaking from like a moral position, like yeah, I think that like women, kids, older folks, younger folks, and men who can't fight or don't want to fight, um, they should be able to get someplace that's safe. I think that's fine. I don't think, using my example, I don't think that means that if the United States becomes a failed state, I can fly to the richest country on the planet and say, you got to take me. I'm an asylee. America's a failed state. I get to live in Monaco now. I don't think that's fair or normal. And then what I would say too is basically like these moral foundations are important, and there's a moral duty on people who are born into bad circumstances to make their circumstances better. This is what makes us human. We take what is already shit, we try to make it incrementally better. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, fuck. Like I was, I like I've never really had to fight to uphold my liberal values, apart from maybe like arguing with Nazis and fucking transphobes on the internet, which I'll do plenty of. But like again, even most people don't even have to do that. So I personally don't really know how I could speak for people like living in Afghanistan or Syria or however obligated they are to uh fight like not only like very strong national but also international forces against yeah, I don't know. I think that's a
You're
bit
okay, but this is what's frustrating for me about your statement.
mm,
You are privileged. We're both privileged. We live in
mm-hmm,
Western society. It has not been this way forever. And on top of that, a shitload of fucking people fought and died and struggled so you could live exactly as you just said. This is not a mistake. This is not an accident. This is
mm-hmm,
intentional. This is not the way human beings naturally live. This is the culmination of historical, cultural, legal, and moral forces that people fought and died over centuries and millennia. So, what I would say is if somebody wants what you have, if somebody wants something that I have, then yeah, sure. If you can't fight for it, maybe you can come to this country and we'll give you a little slice of it. But if you can fight for it where you're at, that's your job if you want what we have.
yeah. I mean that's kind of why like the people I will fight are the ones who I the yeah, and I think you'd probably do the same, is the ones who I actually see who are legitimately threatening liberal and democratic rights. And for the moment, Muslims are they're not doing it. A few of them are, and fuck those guys. But yeah, generally like all the threats to sort of like everything I hold decent about like liberal or European, Western, whatever values. Yeah, seems to be coming from either, like conservatives or like those kind of weird people who call themselves liberal but then vote anti-liberal like whenever they possibly can.
All right, fair enough. Well, I appreciate you. I'm actually really happy that we got to do this one on one because, frankly, I think that like there were plenty of opportunities for us to fucking derail if we were on a panel show and just start yelling at each other and calling each other bad people. No, I do appreciate the ability to do this one on one. We don't have to agree in order to have like good conversation or anything. So I hope that I elucidated some of my points a little bit more clearly. And I know my audience, even if they're being dicks, that's why I ignore chat. I never fucking look at them. So not until we're done with the show. So even if my audience was being dicks, I'm happy that they got exposed to a different perspective. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate it as well. I actually think honestly like your position on like the whole civic national was actually a lot like it seems to be a lot more like permissive than most of what's happening in Europe right now, which I appreciate. Fucking people in your chat, like every fucking like international super soldier saying I'm a nerd with an easy life. What the fuck are you guys doing? And by the way, Nullsect, I can cook. Well, fucking shove my tabbouleh down your fucking beta bitch throat, whatever. Fuck you, stay mad. I love you, Counterpoints.
Love you too, bud.
It,
All good.
yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah,
All right.
listen, fuck chat. They're a bunch of degenerate assholes. Okay, but
I
I'll go talk to him before I go play video games. So,
Yeah, I'll give a good word to mine as well. All right. You have a good one, sir.
see you, buddy.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, chat. Hold on. Stop bullying my guests, you fucking assholes. Jesus Christ. Ooh, that's a beautiful face. Go ahead and look at that for a minute while I get the camera swapped out. Pull the camera out. Put the camera in. Let's reset the camera. Doop 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 doop. I will answer your questions and then we'll leave. That was hot. I hope you guys enjoyed that face. All right, stop being dicks to my desks or dicks to my desks. Stop being dicks to my guest. You fucking assholes. Kalavar, I expect you to behave yourself. So let me jump into live chat. We got 73 of y'all. I appreciate y'all hanging out with me. If you don't need a super chat. If you want to super chat, super chat. If you want to be a member, be a member. If you want to go onto Patreon, go to patreon.com/counterpoints. I'll actually put it in chat right now. Patreon.com/counterpoints. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to start reading all the questions that are at counterpoints. So if you want to start asking me questions, that's totally cool. I'm going to answer questions until I catch up with y'all. When I catch up with y'all, the stream is ended. Let's go. Killnote says, what if we want an actual representative republic that you guys are supposed to have instead of liberal democracy at counterpoints? I don't know. You want direct democracy? Direct democracy is fucking cringe. But we can fight about that later. Killnote says, more localism at counterpoints. Yeah, maybe. I guess. Oh, Connor, I wish I was as naive as you in humankind. That's cool. Ericoda at counterpoints. The guy saying your argument was odd was really frustrating and almost condescending. I do feel like he was ignoring you a bit. Dude, if somebody says my argument is odd, that is the best criticism I've received of any of my arguments online. So, nope, I'm 100% good with that. Anybody can call me odd. That's totally fine. Dicky Boy at counterpoints. What's your opinion on the morality of pegging and would you try it? I wouldn't try it. Maybe when I'm in like my 60s or 70s and I'm on the verge of death and I want to try something new, I'll try it. But no. The morality of pegging, is it good or bad? I don't know. I don't fucking know. All right, patreon.com/counterpoints is in the chat if you want to check it out. If you don't want to check it out, that's totally fine. Just write your questions at counterpoints. Ericoda at counterpoints. What you gonna have on your Patreon? Just signed up for Pogue. Can't wait to see what's on there. Yeah, maybe we'll do. I was actually just thinking about that because we do have like half a dozen to a dozen people who are on there now. So I'm gonna talk to Taze and we're gonna see what we're gonna do. Right now, we're just trying to get the we're trying to get the channel just up and running, basically. So you know, obviously, we're just trying to push out content as much as possible. So I hope you enjoy the content you already have. But, you know, if you need me to, like, fly out and give you a hand job or something, I guess we can figure something out. So, Kalavar at counterpoints. Fine, I'll behave. Yeah, dude, stop bullying my guests or else you're not going to want to come back, you fucking assholes. Longwood Potion Castle says, don't ban me. Lol. Okay, don't be a dick to my guests then. Appreciate you. Genie Jazz at counterpoints. I've seen you on Dylan's panel plenty of times and miss you. You seem so reasonable, and this conversation makes me think you didn't graduate high school. Genie Jazz, eat my ass. Didn't graduate high school. Yeah, Genie Jazz, if you want to come into fucking voice chat, not now, but in general, I would like to see you back up any of your fucking perspectives. I seriously hope you're a fucking troll, because if you think anything that I said was fucking insane, you're probably an ahistorical fucking lunatic. Truth Lie at counterpoints. Do you have a day job in addition to your channel? Yes, I absolutely do. Dude, I've made like $2,000 off of my channel since I monetized a month ago. If I had to live off of $2,000 for the past 2 fucking years, that would not have worked. Nullisect at counterpoints. Milkman localism. All right, we can talk about it sometime. Nerdity at counterpoints. Do you have a place where you show off your Warhammer models? I just started painting and it'd be cool for inspiration. Yeah, Nerdity. DM me on Twitter and join the Discord. We post our stuff in the Discord, and additionally, I post it to Twitter on occasion. So yeah, 100%. Come on in. Should be fun. Kill notes. Traditionalism is very divergent from culture to culture, not like progressivism, which pushes the same places, usually with more bad things than good things at counterpoints. All right, cool. Montclair Bullying 00 at counterpoints. What's your take on breathing? It's good most of the time. I'm looking forward to when I don't have to do it anymore. Sounds relaxing. Bushy Poon at counterpoints. Why do people have an aversion to integrating migrants? I don't know. They're fucking lunatics to me. I think integration and assimilation is a really big part of any liberal democracy. I don't know what the fuck the problem is. That's part of the reason why I talk about it and fight it. Margot Williamson at counterpoints. How do you feel about the Texas abortion law? It's opening up a really bad Pandora's box. I'm really hoping that Democrats don't use that in order to do similar shit with guns, because they're gonna try. Kill notes at counterpoints. I heard from several people that if a state like California separated in the supposed 3 to 4 states it should have been Republicans would have had a chance in there. Yeah, probably. Absolutely. Let's break up California. Chris Wang at counterpoints. How much do you know about the Chinese government and Chinese immigration? Modern stuff, not so much, but I know a decent chunk about like 20th century Chinese history. So if you wanted to come in the Discord and kind of educate me or give me some good books, I'd be happy. The modern stuff is harder to track because it's happening now, whereas like pretty much up until 1974, I think I have a pretty good handle on it. Null sect at counterpoint. Should people that don't identify with civic nationalist values be forcibly integrated into the civic nation, or should we have some kind of a nation? Yeah, like if you're in America, you should be forcibly assimilated. If you're in some other fucking country, I don't give a shit what you do. Muhammad Al-Khwarizmi. What do you think of Islam prescribing consumption of alcohol when Islamic scholars discovering distillation, which results in the bottom shelf Kentucky crap I am currently drinking? Yeah. Well, maybe Muslims need to get their shit together and start fucking manufacturing alcohol again, and then maybe you can be, the Ummah can rise to their true potential. Cullivar at counterpoints. How are you doing on the goal for the computer? Oh, we're there. We had a really big donor. I'm not going to thank him by name because he wanted to stay anonymous. But somebody gave us a fucking chunk of change. Literally dropped $1,000 on a PayPal dono, making y'all look like a bunch of schmucks. But we have enough money for the computer, and then after that we're going to start paying Taze. So I'm really excited. So the computer's going to be taken care of probably within the next month. We're just going to buy all the parts and build it into a new case. We have to keep the old graphics processing unit because all the GPUs right now are so expensive, but we're going to redo the rest of the computer, so we should have a good rig by the end of this month. Not the end of this month, end of next month. And then we'll take it from there. And then basically I'm going to start paying Taze. He's done a lot of work for the channel, so I want to get him caught up from a financial standpoint for all the work that he's already done. And then going forward, I'm obviously going to take a slice for myself. But I think we want to reinvest back into equipment in order to make the channel better and better, and also bring you guys some cool content, like maybe some firearms training stuff, maybe some IRL stuff, maybe like a lav mic, or some iPhone gear so we can do some on-site shooting. I think that'd be really fun. So we'll invest it back into the channel. So Some Kind of Nature, who is a member. Thank you, Some Kind of Nature, for being a member. Are my messages not getting picked up? I mean, like, I'm seeing them now. So if I missed anything, just do at counterpoints again, and I'll answer your question. Lear in the Dark at counterpoints. Is there sufficient percentage of citizens with shared American values to help assimilate immigrants? Some concern that the country is too internally divided on these values to integrate. Yeah, I'm concerned about that as well. I would say 60-70%, and I don't think we're there right now. I don't think we agree on what it is to be American, and we need to figure that the fuck out. Poika at counterpoints. So what is your overall policy on Afghanistan? How do you think the situation compares to the year 2000 when the Taliban were in power and the U.S. had a Pashtun Northern Alliance? I think that the Taliban are more likely to negotiate with Northern Alliance at this point because they know that it'll look bad if they devolve into civil war. So I think that the people who actually want to hold the Taliban accountable within the country have a better chance of doing so. But besides that, I don't think much has changed. Margaret Williamson at counterpoints. I appreciate how you discuss topics, and I like that you're getting your channel up. What do you feel is the hardest part of becoming a streamer like this? Probably, dude, I've been researching shit for a decade. I've been reading history books. I've been debating people. I've been talking, like all that kind of stuff. Learning how to talk, learning how to communicate ideas in effective ways, and also doing all the research necessary. I mean, literally, I researched stuff on a personal level for a decade before becoming a YouTube streamer. So that's probably the hardest shit, is all the pre-work. So you don't have to do it. You can just come on here and start spouting your bullshit opinions just like everybody else. So don't hold yourself to that standard. But that was the harder part, was all the pre-work. Nerdity at counterpoints. I've strayed away from Twitter but I guess I'll make one for that. Haha. Yeah, you probably shouldn't. It's really bad for you. Colabar at Counterpoints. Why is no one on Twitch or YouTube talking about the risk of India getting buck wild on Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China? They are very nervous, I've read. Yeah, maybe, but at the same time, they've been in the same position for like 20 or 30 years and they're all nuclear power, so the chances of them actually fucking each other up are probably pretty low. Custer Douglas at Counterpoints. Would you oppose a ban on infant circumcision? Would you oppose a ban on infant? Yeah, kind of. Like, I still think there's a religious duty, but it is, FGM for dudes. I think it's less serious than FGM for females, but I don't know. Jews and some Christians would get pissed off. I don't know what to do about it. We'll think about it later. Longwood Potion Castle at Counterpoints. Is it the world's job to help those failed nations or just the USA? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's just the United States' job. We should just take in immigrants from every failed state on the entire, planet forever. And we don't have to worry about like logistics or housing people or cultural clashes. It's totally fine. Just, don't worry about it. Just open borders for just for the United States though. Nobody else. Just open borders for the US. Lion in the Dark. Would bringing up China as hypothetical failed state, sending 1 billion asylum seekers to the US be a good question for Loader, or am I missing something? Yeah, I asked that on the panel last night, and it was actually really fucking funny because like she went ahead and was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like I literally saw her freak out about that point. But you got to ask yourself, like, if 300 million, literally double our population, one from a completely different culture with completely different values, wanted to come here overnight, do we just grant them asylum, even if they're going to completely change the culture and make it no longer a liberal democracy? I think these are important questions, even if they're just hypotheticals. Arakota at Counterpoints. What's your favorite kind of liquor? It used to be rum, but that's a lot of sugar. So, I don't know. I don't know anymore. Whiskey's pretty good. So, Big Hoff 98 at Counterpoints. What is his opinion on interventionism? Because I can't figure out how leftists think we should only solve the world's problems through taking refugees. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, I'm being a little bit of an asshole because I'm tired and I want to go play video games. But yeah, like we can only do good things. We can't do bad things. It's kind of naive. Chris Wang at Counterpoints. Do you believe China is ethno-nationalist? Yeah, a little bit. But I would be happy to be educated on the subject. I think the Han dominate politics and society. I would be interested in how they see Tibetans and Manchurians and Uyghurs and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, but if you again, if you want to come in the Discord and educate me, I'm always happy to learn. Calabar Counterpoints. Can we have a pay Taze goal every month or something? Not like the full amount, but kind of like a running bonus for him. Yeah, sure. Let's do it. Kill notes. I prefer nuanced authoritarianism, which is mostly how it's practiced, over totalitarianism, communist or not. At Counterpoints. All right, cool. Nullisect at Counterpoints. Have you heard of the academic agent on TY? Did you mean YouTube? Oh, okay, yeah. I haven't heard of academic agent, but maybe I'll check him out. That's a good name. Nullisect at Counterpoints. What is your experience with the political cultural views of people in the police and in the military? They're all conservatives. Like seriously, like 80, 20, 90, 10 conservatives. So there's some liberals and progressives, but that's about it. Kung Fu Joe. Hong equals Chinese mafia. Han. HAN. Kung Fu Joe. Don't be a fucking smartass. Nullisect at Counterpoints. What is your experience with the political cultural views of... Yeah, I already answered that. At Counterpoints. Would love to talk whiskey with you. Got into it as a whole new world. Sweet. Yeah, just make some recommendations. I'm not somebody who really gets into the distillery shit, but whatever. So, all right, I'm caught up with y'all. So I'm going to go play video games because I fucking want to. I appreciate you. Check out patreon.com/counterpoints if you haven't done so already. We'll be spamming the PayPal stuff. That way YouTube isn't getting a bigger cut. If you want to do super chats in the future or YouTube memberships in the future, it's sincerely appreciated. And I'm going to go play video games in a second. Gas PR at Counterpoints. What's your ideal tax policy? I'm okay with progressive taxes. I just think that we should have like a minimum thing. Like you shouldn't be able to pay, like poor people, maybe they should have like a zero tax burden. But if you're making like a living wage, you should have like a minimum tax burden of like 5% or 10% of your income. And then same thing for like rich people. They should have like a minimum burden of like 20% or something like that. Culavar at Counterpoints. Have you ever heard of the Don the Pleb? He is an ex-Marine. No, but we'll check it out. God damn it, you fucking assholes. Chronic Tim at Counterpoints. Am I too dumb to come back here and debate in live comments with comments? No, that's totally fine. Come back and debate the comments. Just don't be rude to my guests. God damn it, guys. Are you serious? Mr. McDonough. And Counterpoints. Often in regards to refugees, it's expected that they are going to leave sooner or later, but this is unrealistic. See Syria. Should there be a difference of expectations in regards to refugees? Yeah, 100%. We can get into that another night. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. Margaret Williamson at Counterpoints. How old are you? I'm in my early to mid 30s. We're starting to get there. So, do you have the degree? I have a 4-year degree, but I've also studied like another like 30 credits worth of history. What do you go? Bovise says, "What are you going to play?" We're going to play Halo. So, all right, I'm gonna listen to Kung Fu Joe. I'm out. Catch y'all. Have a great night. Bye.